Hello, it is I, your fellow content creator that uploads once a month, and today I'm going to be talking about my new main character that is extremely high level. It is not. But today I'm going to be talking about the Boomeranger, and I will be going over the two hidden effects, Blast Bow and Cyclone inside U12, and just giving some of my thoughts, opinions, explaining what do they were, advantages, disadvantages, and all of that. In case you didn't know by my terrible intro, there's going to be another live commentary. I asked this question inside the community tab, just going over which of the hidden effect that you prefer using, and a lot of people ended up just voting. I put in all three of them. I put Mysterious Urn just for the trolls, but mainly I wanted to know which of the two, either Blast Bow or Cyclone, you end up using, and most people ended up using just Cyclone, and that got me curious, why do a lot of people just end up using Cyclone over the Blast Bow on the Boomeranger? And yeah, why not? The reason I'm doing this is just mainly because on console, at the very least, pretty much everywhere, but especially on console, everyone, their mom, their dog, is using the goddamn Boomeranger. It's kind of crazy. Like, you literally just go into long shade and all you see is like 3 or 4 Boomerangers just jumping around like crazy. Like, if you're using any other character, you're already in the minority. But yeah, that's why I essentially just wanted to talk about the Boomeranger, because it's a very common topic, and I wanted to just talk about certain things that I discovered and certain things that some people might find interesting. That's going to be the topic of today's video. Let's just start talking about the two hidden effects, starting off with Cyclone, because it is going to be a lot more popular than Blast Bow. When I did the community tab, 70% was in favor of Cyclone, so it is going to be the first one that I'm going to be talking about. So Cyclone, what it does is going to be, whenever you do the melee basic attack, the spin is going to pull all enemies towards you. This is one thing that I will be mentioning, is that the pulling distance is much larger than the VFX shows you. It's only using the same VFX as the Vanguardian. Whenever you do change from range to melee mode, that is going to be like a very small blue pyre disc. However, the pulling distance is ridiculous. It is actually a 9x9 block distance. It is, in other words, this. A lot of people may or may not know about that. I've made a whole video series just going over every single hidden effect in the game, where I did like hand tested and all of that. The Cyclone's range is ridiculous. Here's some footage right here of the actual pulling distance of Cyclone. Do not be fooled by the VFX that you do see on your character. Just remember that the pulling distance is a whole lot more. The reason I'm mentioning all of this is because I've seen a lot of people using the Boomeranger and they immediately just go and try to chase enemies down. You really don't need to chase enemies down. You can literally just stand right in the middle of the curse skull and you're going to be able to pull all enemies in. And outside of that, that's literally all Cyclone does. It is going to be extremely effective and really good when dealing with ranged enemies. And the reason I'm mentioning all of this is in long shade, especially the 5-star dungeon, there's a lot of ranged enemies, especially inside the Cursed Skull. Unlike Geotop side, where Geotop side Cursed Skull, literally every single enemy was close range, inside long shade, the majority of the enemies are ranged. And so having something like this is going to be really good, because it allows you to pull all enemies in as soon as they spawn. Essentially just making the Cursed Skull into pretty much the Geotop side Cursed Skull. Another thing that I will be mentioning is going to be that the basic attack is not that strong. So if you're using the Boomeranger, the basic attack is going to be better if you use it more as a utility base rather than as your main damage source, because the damage multiplier is only a 2x damage. The tornado effect that it does is only 2.5, and the attacks per second base is 1.25. So in case you don't know how much damage that is, 2x damage is the same damage multiplier that you do with the Shadow Hunter with the class gem or Pirate Captain, and then 1.25 base attacks per second is the same attacks per second as Revenant and Fate Trickster, which is tied for second slowest. So it is going to be below average damage and tied for the second slowest basic attack. It is honestly going to be much better if you just pull all enemies in and then just use your ability. And then another thing that I need to mention is going to be in regards to the melee abilities. The Boomeranger has this distinct mechanic that if you're using bow, your abilities are going to be different than whenever you use your melee. So melee Boomeranger, it has like the big boomerang, and it also has the mini bomb. I would probably say that the Boomeranger's melee kit is going to be weaker than the bow in that regard. The big boomerang is slow as hell. You can easily just miss it, and that is the only thing that it lowers your cooldown. So it's really not that good. It does 10 times damage, which is really good. But outside of that, it's really just bad ability. Whenever you do catch it, it will reduce the cooldown by 7 seconds on all of your ability, which is pretty good. I would probably just recommend that ability to just throw it on the ground and just get the cooldown reduction outside of just throwing it to deal damage to all enemies, and just use the mini bombs to kill all types of other enemies. The ultimate ability is the same on both melee and bow, and I will probably just recommend you to use the ultimate ability only on bosses rather than using it everywhere. The reason being is because the boomeranger on melee mode doesn't do as much DPS as the boomeranger on bow. Frankly speaking, it's still the boomeranger, it still does ridiculous damage. But if you're wanting to be the most efficient possible, then I would probably just recommend just using the basic attack to pull all enemies in, throw a couple of cluster bombs, and then just let the chickens do the rest of the work, throw some boomerangs here and there. That's essentially the thing that I noticed whenever I was just using Cyclone for the boomeranger. And then whenever I encounter a boss, that's when I throw down the rest of the other abilities, including the ultimate ability, because none of the other abilities were particularly good against bosses incomparable to the bow. And that's just essentially going to be the whole thing with Cyclone. TLDR, Cyclone is going to be very good when it comes to dishing out with ranged enemies, which is very important for launch because of the Cursed Skull having a lot of ranged enemies. Outside of that, some of the other abilities are not as great as the bow, but the thing is that the abilities are still strong enough that it's going to dish out pretty good damage, even if you don't include like the bow abilities. The chickens are still doing 9 times damage even if you do only spawn one at a time, and the ultimate ability again is still as ridiculous as ever. And that's essentially the advantage that the boomeranger melee has with Cyclone. Is just comfiness. It's not necessarily the strongest out of the two, it's just much more comfy, it's much easier to use, it's much easier to be much more consistent. That's probably the best word that I could just put it. It's more consistent. It's weaker, but it's more consistent. And then we move on to Blast Bow. Blast Bow is going to be, instead of consistency, is more potential. To explain Blast Bow, what it does is whenever you do hit an enemy with the basic attack on the bow, it's going to trigger an explosion dealing damage to all enemies around it. I also did discover that if you do hit the enemy with the third basic attack, essentially all enemies that could get hit with the explosion also trigger an explosion, similar to like something like a chain reaction. This is very important whenever you're dealing out with Cursed Skulls and also with bosses, because the majority of the bosses actually do spawn minions, and the more enemy that you have, if you do hit with the third basic attack, it's going to cause that chain reaction, causing more explosion, causing more damage. However, the damage is not going to be really high, so just letting you know that don't rely too much on the damage on the AoE from the Blast Bow. It's only 1 times damage multiplier, so it's not really good. But the good thing is going to be that it has no cooldown. So having no cooldown and it is targeted for each enemy hit is going to be like a mini version of the Ice Age's class gem. And that is going to be really, really strong, because if you do have a lot of enemies, that means that you're going to cause a lot of explosion. However, like I just mentioned before, a lot of enemies inside Cursed Skull are ranged enemy, which it means not a lot of enemies are going to be clumped up together. However, there is one little tactic that you can end up using. This is something that I've mentioned like I believe like 5 years ago, because I did mention that you can do this with something like the Shadow Hunter to make the character a lot more effective for something like Cursed Skull. So what you can end up doing is whenever you do jump like really high up in the air, probably around 15 blocks from the enemies, all of the enemies that can move will immediately just rush below you. This is a thing that you can end up doing inside Cursed Skulls, so you can essentially just get all of the enemies just clumped up together into one block, so you can trigger a bunch of explosion immediately. This is really, really good for the boomeranger, because if you do have enough stats and if you manage to pull this off, it means that you can easily just destroy Cursed Skull without the need of using any ability. Obviously, using abilities are going to be very, very effective. But if you can avoid using abilities, that means that you don't need to use cooldown reduction on the boomeranger, and you can use something like Unyielding Emblem and use only your abilities against bosses, so you can burst down all of the bosses. To me personally, it creates a lot more potential on the character, because it allows you to just use the abilities for bosses and just use the basic attack for Cursed Skull, which is really, really strong if you do manage to pull this off. That's why I did mention potential, because there's some things that you need to keep in mind. If you do jump pretty high up in the air, like high enough that the Cursed Skull stops detecting you from, being in the radius, that means that the Cursed Skull can easily just reset, which can happen if you don't know like the distance. The other thing is going to be is that if the enemies doesn't get clumped up together, which can happen sometimes. The enemies are weird in this game. Obviously, if you are in a really enclosed area, all of these areas can be destroyed by bombs, so you can just bomb your way upwards like 2 or 3 times, and you can immediately just shoot downwards. That's going to be enough distance for you to actually just go ahead and get this technique, and I mean technique in quotations. So that's a thing that you can end up doing with the blast bow if you want to just be extremely effective in sector skulls, which makes the character like a lot more consistent because it allows you to just use your abilities for bosses, and the abilities on the bow are better than the abilities on the melee because the 3 boomerangs you can hold up to 4 stacks of those boomerangs, and they do recover every single time that you do hit an enemy with a 3rd attack of your basic attack. And if you manage to do that, then you're going to recover a boomerang, and those boomerangs are going to not only stun, do like pretty good damage. I believe they do either 4.5 or 6.5. It's one of those 2 damage numbers per boomerang, and that's 3 boomerangs. And if you do have multiple stacks, you can technically just spam them and you can just do some ridiculous burst damage. And then the big bombs is going to be much better than the mini bombs because you can just throw it down and it will detonate, spawning 3 chickens immediately, and that's just going to make it like a lot more consistent rather than just having to rely on having multiple mini bombs so you can spawn even more chickens. This is just 1 bomb and you immediately just get it. So you can quickly see that the blast bow has more potential. The burst damage capabilities on blast bow is just way higher. However, there's things that you need to keep in mind. You need to know how to jump high enough in the air to actually just get all of the burst damage capability from Cursed Skull, and obviously you need to know when to use your abilities and when to not use your abilities so you can actually just take full advantage of the blast bow. So TLDR, blast bow just is stronger than Cyclone. However, Cyclone is just much more comfy and much easier to use. So it depends on which type of playstyle that you go for. Do you just want to go for like the very lazy route, just hold down basic attack and throw down the ability every so often? You don't care about speed and you only care about just comfiness and all of that, then probably Cyclone is going to be your best bet. And blast bow is going to be if you really want to go ahead and just take the damage on the character to the next level. I personally use blast bow over Cyclone. Again, like I just mentioned, I've been doing the jumping thing for more than 5 years because I use the Shadow Hunter, and that's how I used to use the Shadow Hunter. So me personally, blast bow just suits my playstyle a lot better than just using Cyclone. Cyclone is still like really effective at the end of the day. It's still the boomeranger. It does ridiculous damage no matter which ability that you're using. In comparison to any of the other characters, it's still really strong. But if you're doing a comparison between like blast bow and Cyclone, I would probably say Cyclone is going to be weaker but easier. Blast bow is going to be more difficult but stronger. That's blast bow and that's Cyclone. If you want the full information on blast bow, Cyclone, I made a full playlist on every single hidden effect in the entirety of the game in detail in short form videos. Very scripted, very highly edited. I would highly recommend you to go for it. But yeah, that's going to be the end of the video. Let me know also in the comment section down below if you want to see any other type of videos like this, just going over some of the other characters and just giving some of my honest thoughts and opinions, because I've been doing other testing behind the scenes as well on some of the other characters. There are some characters that I think are very interesting to use. If you're just bored of using the boomeranger, I can just show you some other characters that might be interested in the 5-star dungeon grinding, even some very big surprises. So if you want me to do and cover all of that, just let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you for sticking around. As always, leave a like, sub, close to 5.5k, and yeah, like always, and I hope to see you next time. Take care, keep on hunting, and farewell.